So thanks to everyone who has come for this OpenBazaar development meeting. Could be a quick one today. There are three primary things that I'd like to focus on in this update. The first is the 2.2.5 release, which came out this week. This release is primarily a bug fix, mostly on the server side. There are a few improvements in this release. One is that if you have a mismatched server and client, differing versions, then it gives you a warning. And in the warning itself, it gives you links on how to update your update manually as well. Stores can also be filtered by listing type now. And also, you may have noticed if you've been clicking around since it came out, that there's also a new loading screen. Instead of just getting sort of a spinner, there's some text there explaining that you're connecting to the store and giving you a message to sort of hold on. There's also a button there to try again as well if the connection fails. So that's the primary stuff that's been happening with 2.2.5. Anyone on the OB1 side that would like to mention anything in the most recent release that I haven't noted? Okay, sounds like no. So the next thing I'd like to...
Sam, I missed the very beginning. Did you cover the server bugs that we fixed?
I did not. I just said that they existed, but yeah, if anyone would like to mention what those were, please go for it.
Well, I don't think we need to go into the details of all of them. The important part is we uncovered a number of potential issues that we solved and put in a lot more robust error checking code, which should help us in the future. There's also a lot of linting and a lot of code cleanup that went into this release.
Yeah, and actually thank you for mentioning that, Josh. As I understood it, because we're doing better checks now, and there's better information if something fails, there might be some new error messages or new errors that happen that didn't happen before. It's not that the errors weren't happening, it's just that they were happening without giving any information. So if anyone is testing on the server side and they notice some new behavior, obviously, as always, please feel free to open up a GitHub issue, hit us on Slack, let us know what you're seeing. So thanks for that, Josh. The next area is the multi-wallet work, which we've been working on for quite some time now, but we've had a big milestone over the past few weeks. The server API integration is now completed, or hopefully completed. It's going through testing now. That means that we're now attempting integration on both the desktop client side as well as on the mobile app itself. So a substantial proportion of the multi-wallet work is now completed and is largely in the testing phase. Another thing that we've been doing, not on the code for multi-wallet within OpenBazaar, within OB itself, but is sort of determining the health and reliability of the infrastructure around multi-wallet that's needed. Most importantly, the insight servers that are going to be, we plan on using as sort of the default way for the multi-wallet to talk to the various blockchains that are supported. And initial tests are promising that Insight is going to be able to do what we need. However, it does appear that OB1 is going to be running some of that infrastructure, as the existing public infrastructure out there doesn't have everything that's needed, can't do everything that we want for the multi-wallet to occur. So OB1 is going to be building out some of that infrastructure, but we do hope that there are other folks, either in the community or who provide the service, such as a company called Block that will have other Insight servers, so it's not just dependent on one infrastructure. We're going to be putting out public information about some of the testing we've done in the future, so keep an eye on the blog. And primarily the stress testing, or primarily the testing that's been done, has been just checking that like blocks are coming in correctly, that transactions are going through correctly. And we're now looking at scaling that up a little bit to try to do a whole bunch of queries and see how many it can take before it fails, a bunch of transactions, that type of thing. We'll have more information on that. Mike, you've been the one who's been sort of leading the testing of this infrastructure. Is there anything that you'd like to add?
You hit primarily the broad strokes. I think everything that we want to release publicly will be in a blog post that'll probably happen in the next month or so. But overall, we just want to make certain that our API-based wallet experience is going to live up to our users' expectations, and we just want to shore up any risk of failure from third-party servers with some of our own. So this is going to make long strides towards ensuring those servers will stand up and be there when we need them.
Yeah, thank you. So, is there anything happening on the multi-wallet work that I had mentioned that anyone from the OB1 to weigh in on?
I think you covered it all, Sam.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Chris Troutner asked in chat, who's been leading the charge on understanding the code that makes the Insight server. You'd like to pick their brain offline. Chris has been doing a lot of that work. Chris Hacia. Chris, if Troutner wanted to learn more about Insight, what's the best way to do that?
I don't know. I guess maybe just kind of reading the docs. I'm only really kind of just using their API, so I think it's kind of. I know like Tyler and Brian have more experience like building it, and that sort of stuff. I haven't done any of that, building it and keeping it running.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks, Chris. I'm just for the work. I'm about to start diving into Insight and learning more about how to run it, and just So it's good. I was just hoping to have someone to ping with questions. So it sounds like if I have questions about the API, maybe I can ping you, and maybe Tyler would be better for the actual setup and running and infrastructure side.
Yeah.
Cool.
All right, good deal. And we'll move on to the last area that we've been focusing on, which is plans for the web. So this is something that we've discussed in the past. OpenBazaar has been solely focused on, or available on desktop since the beginning. And of course, we know that we've wanted to bring it to other platforms. Mobile is a huge part of that, but we are also bringing it to the web. There is already the OpenBazaar.com, which is just sort of a read-only version of the network, letting you hit our gateways to view things on the network. But we are wanted to build a buyer-only web interface so that you will be able to purchase things through the web on OpenBazaar. And that's not a simple thing to do. It's kind of hard to build. And so our approach has been to build multiple sort of proof of concepts showing that the different separate components needed to have a buyer experience on the web are viable, are possible. And so that's what we have been doing. So we're at the point now where peer IDs are generated and stored locally. And then that data can be synced to a storage provider and across browsers through the storage provider as well. And now we're working on sending messages through a relay node, which is necessary based on the way that it's working now. And keys also work as well. So the next step is generating the data needed to make a purchase. And then once that's done, all of the different sort of components needed for the web buying experience, we actually have to figure out how to plan to put them all together. Well, not to be clear, not put together what's been built. These are proof of concepts to show that they're possible. Plan and design the actual full app itself. So, Josh, thank you for that update. I was just reading off something that Josh gave me.
Yeah, one thing to make clear, Sam, is when we say messages, like we're not talking about chat messages, which, I mean, those are included. But messages is literally all messaging within the app where one node will talk to another. So if we get this system for sending messages through relay servers working, that will enable any an implementation of a browser version to speak to any regular node that's on the network and exchange data with it.
Right. Because the nodes that are going to be created online through the website aren't full members of the network, or they're not the same as running it on desktop or mobile. And so there needs to be this sort of go-between the nodes are. We have been keeping an eye on IPFS JS, which just had another release the other day, but that still is not sufficient for us to use. I think DHT still has not been implemented. That's like the last big thing, if I'm correct. But as of now, it looks like that's not the infrastructure that we're going to be using to build this. It can be built without it, and it's not ready yet, so it's academic anyway. Okay, is there anything on the building for OpenBazaar web side that I haven't mentioned that's worth mentioning? Sounds like no. Those are all. I'm sorry, did someone want to jump in?
Yeah, this is Chris Troutner. I've got a quick question about the web stuff. And maybe this is a premature, but can you guys talk a little bit about like the API and how it will so there's the I'm familiar with the OpenBazaar server API, and then now there's this new web paradigm that you guys are building, which is awesome. And I assume there's a connection. Like, will there just in broad strokes, will there be any sort of way of using, say, like a web page, or the web page for browsing and buying on OpenBazaar to interact with the API somehow, like just from even if it's just from a buyer standpoint?
So, Chris, this is Mike. The general idea for the infrastructure is we'll have a relay node that all of our web-based browser connections are going to be peering and connecting through. I suspect there's going to be some requirement in the short term for this relay node until the IPFS and P2P libraries are more mature. And there may be a library that's JavaScript based that could allow you to transmit messages into these relays and possibly even have a way for you to run and operate your own relay, which, depending on what the time scale is for some of these things, could make sense. But that's the direction that we're taking it today. Whether that API is going to be public and available for you to poke at is still unclear.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. Thanks, Mike.
Since Moonshot just asked if the server could be multi-tenant or allow multiple users, there are some privacy concerns around that, considering the fact that an individual node manages the keys for that user. Having multiple users in a single node could present some privacy concerns that I think that we would rather just handle by having segregated environments and having just one node handle the single user. This way, a user could ensure that the operation of that node is self-contained. Their keys are only in the one place, and they don't have to worry about, a database lookup going wrong and allowing that key to be exposed to the wrong person, for example. So to answer your second question, you ask about the relay node and if that's meant to do that to any degree. We're trying to design the relay node to be agnostic of the users connecting to it and not trying to track the state of an individual user's connection, so that a browser in an ideal environment could connect to any relay, and any given relay on the network would have enough information to be able to say, all right, let me get the rest of your state from the network without having to know anything about that user or what the state of that network actually looks like. So basically the relay would be unaware of what data it's handling. It would all be completely encrypted by that user's key. And we're taking the step further to try to make sure that the messages that you're pulling in aren't specifically for that one user. So I don't know, there's lots of privacy implications there, and Chris might be able to speak better to it. It's more his ball game. That's the gist of it.
Yeah, I think it's going to use the same feature that we use on the offline messages, where you fetch your messages kind of by like a prefix of your peer ID, not the peer ID itself. So it provides a little bit of privacy there, in the sense that you don't, your prefix could overlap with somebody else, so the recipient has to then kind of attempt to decrypt the messages and see which ones are for him or not.
So hopefully that answers your question, Moonshot. The objective here is to maintain privacy for the user. So the relay shouldn't know anything about the user that's transmitting messages across its wire, and doesn't have access to any of the keys for transmitting those messages.
All right, thanks, Mike and Chris. So those are all the updates that I had down for OB1, stuff we've been working over the past couple of weeks. Something I should have mentioned at the top of the call, and I forgot, is that this meeting is moving to monthly instead of every 2 weeks. Something that was noted in the email invite sent out. We will not be here 2 weeks from now anyway. Company retreat. So please note that. I believe you're on the calendar invite for this that already was updated. Is there anything else from the OB1 side that has been worked on over the past couple weeks that anyone would like to highlight?
Sure. So this is Mike. Out of some of the Insight server testing, we've produced a utility that allows you to exercise an Insight server. And it's very likely that we'll open source this along with the report with methodology and results from the testing, because I think it's probably helpful to the broader community. But if there are interesting metrics that we might be able to easily build into it, or interesting ideas for how this script might be used, could be considered with how we release the software. I'd be curious about those. You can share those with me in the Slack. My handle is MG.
Moving forward, most of our work, over the next month, we are going to be at the retreat, but most of the work is going to be focused on this multi-wallet, trying to get this out as soon as possible. A lot, obviously, will be focused on the mobile application. That's actually something worth updating as well. Excuse me. I don't know. I don't have a good sense for the latest state of the mobile application, other than now that the multi-wallet is very far along on the server side. There's been a lot of work done to incorporate those changes. If anyone on the call is on the mobile side and has an update there, feel free to jump in. But I think multi-wallet and mobile are where there's going to be the most work over the next month or so. All right, well, these dev calls, we always open up for people to ask questions, which you guys are already doing in chat, which is great. And also to give any information you guys want about things that you're working on in the ecosystem. So if anyone would like to ask questions or talk about what you're working on, please feel free to speak up or to go ahead and put that up in chat as well.
Hey, this is Chris Troutner. I had an update for you guys. So I recently was hired by Bitcoin.com to help with some web infrastructure that we're building. And where OpenBazaar comes in on that is I'm going to be paid in Bitcoin Cash. And it turns out there are several other contractors in North America like me who are also getting paid in Bitcoin Cash. So we're going to have an incentive to buy stuff on OpenBazaar and use our cryptocurrency to actually buy stuff to live off of. And so I'm pretty excited about that because I've got into OpenBazaar kind of from the technical standpoint. I'm really excited to actually start dedicating some of my income to trying to buy stuff off of it. And I'm encouraging everyone else that I'm working with to do the same.
Well, Chris, what are you working on insight related stuff for them? Is that why you were asking about that?
Yeah, I'm kind of, so they are creating an SDK called Bitbox, or they have it. It's out there and it's ready to use. And then me personally, one of my job roles is going to be to stay on top of the wormhole specification. We already have an SDK, and so I am going to. So that's one thing I'm going to be doing. I'm also going to be heading up the sort of the DevOps and testing of this SDK. So implementing unit tests and integration tests and end-to-end tests and all the DevOps tooling around that. So that's going to be my focus. Their insight is one part of the SDK touches it, a few of the endpoints touches insight. And recently in the last few days, we've been having some trouble with BitPay's testnet. It went down for a week, and it really that was kind of a bummer. So I'm gonna be more vigilant about creating tests, especially for any third-party things that we rely on to detect them when they go down and have issues and try and move away from third parties. So there's definitely an aspect of the insight. I don't have a full grasp on the scope of it. And we're definitely trying to my personal goal is to eliminate as many third-party dependencies as possible. So yeah, that's basically what I'm doing in a nutshell.
Okay. So it sounds like that Bitbox gets its data from Insight then, right?
Yeah, just for a few of the endpoints, and yeah, so that's what I want to do. Is I think one of the next steps for me is I'm going to learn how to set up Insight or Bitcore, I believe is the actual library. I'm going to learn how to set it up myself and get it running myself and get a local instance running so that I can sort of wean us off of BitPay's, the dependency on their public API.
Okay, so it's relying on BitPay
at the moment.
Okay.
All right, thanks, Chris. Well, congratulations on the new position. That's exciting. It sounds as though you're going to get to be a real hardcore tester of OpenBazaar now. So please, obviously, I'm sure you will, but keep us up to date on how well it's working for you. If you're using it, you might be using it for, a lot of things. I'm sure you'll have some feedback, so that's great.
Yeah, I'm very excited to be able to focus on the crypto space as my full-time job, as opposed to just a hobby, which has been the case for the last couple years.
Yeah, that's really neat. And I mean, I've seen that transition a lot, which is an exciting when that happens. So, congrats.
Thanks.
Rod asked, speaking of Bitcoin Cash, what are some of the main barriers to getting the multi-currency support set up right now? There are a few people on the team who could speak to why that's difficult to do and what we've been doing to do that. Chris, do you want to speak to how switching from the current approach of one coin per node to multiple coins has taken some time?
Yeah, the primary issue is, when OpenBazaar was designed as a single coin, it was using a custom written SPV wallet that I wrote, which actually library works fairly well. And it's pretty secure. It validates the headers and connects to the peer-to-peer network. So it was not reliant on any infrastructure. It just connected directly to the peer-to-peer network and did its thing. And it validated the SPV proofs and all of that. But that does tend to be fairly heavy. I don't want to say heavyweight, like modern laptops can easily handle it. But if you start talking about having a multi-coin architecture running, well, one, we don't have, the only ones we have SPV wallets for are Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash, just because it was very easy to port the Bitcoin one over to Bitcoin Cash. But we don't have that SPV wallet for any other coins. But also, if you're talking about running multiple SPV wallets, like 4 or 5 SPV wallets on the same machine, it can start to get a little bit heavyweight because they can spend quite a bit of time, downloading lots of headers and syncing and doing a lot of resource-intensive work and to get caught up. And especially on a mobile device where you're kind of bandwidth constrained and CPU constrained to some extent, multiple SPV wallets would really kind of be like a non-starter. So we decided that the best way to handle the multiple coins at the same time was to move away from the peer-to-peer SPV wallets and adopt an API-based architecture that's kind of more lightweight, and it just makes query, just tells the server, hey, here's my addresses, give me the balance. But that required writing out a bunch of code to essentially create a wallet for each one of these coins that we're going to implement, an API-based wallet for each one of these coins that we implement, and it also makes sure that the servers that we're using have to be able to handle the load and reliable and what have you. And so that was kind of like the prerequisite before we could kind of even get started in OpenBazaar Go. And now, OpenBazaar Go, the way it was designed, was all around a single wallet. So now all that code that was designed around a single wallet needs to change to handle the multiple wallet scenario. And so that's what we're kind of mostly closing in on finishing this week. So the multi-wallet itself, the different wallets for each of these coins, has already been written. So has the most of the code for integrating the multi-wallet into OpenBazaar Go. And now it's kind of just a matter of like testing it and build our test suite. It broke a lot of stuff in our test suite that we have to now go back and fix and probably create like a reg test type system for the API wallets to spruce up our test suite and get it running again. So that's kind of where we are. It's at this point, we're kind of close. It's just hopefully we get the server situation straightened out and they're reliable enough. And the wallet could be, the OpenBazaar Go side could be ready to go in a couple of weeks. And then we just have the integration into the actual user interface that is currently in progress. And that's it.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. Moonshot's followed up the question. Does that mean the wallets for each coin need to be trusted since you are not going to be running SPV for each one?
Yeah, that's one of the downsides to that API-based model. We are going to the existing SPV wallets for Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash are still going to be a config option. So you can go in and if you want to run multiple SPV wallets at the same time, one for Bitcoin, one for Bitcoin Cash, you'll still have that option in the config. But for Litecoin and Zcash, it'll be API only. We do have some code to use a Zcash full node, but to my knowledge, like almost nobody uses it. So that's probably not going to be bringing that back at least initially. But maybe down the road we can look into hooking up the full node Zcash again. But you got to focus on what people are using now.
Yeah, so I just want to highlight something Chris just said, which is that by default, it's going to be the API wallet approach. However, you can still continue running SPV for Bitcoin or Bitcoin Cash, which is basically primarily what everyone on the network is doing now, except for a handful of people using Zcash. So people can continue using it the way they have been using it, but by default, we'll be switching to this API approach. And that will happen when the 2.3 release comes out, which we don't have a specific date for, but it's the next major release that we are working toward, and a substantial proportion of the work for that has been completed.
Yes, something to interject there, Sam.
Yeah, go ahead.
The current plan, which we're still working on, is when the multi-wallet update occurs, users will be shown in some way that they have the option to use the cloud version or continue to use SPV wallets if they want to.
I don't know if that's been decided, actually. Josh, has that? I know that
We talked about it yesterday. I mean, like I said, we're still discussing how that's exactly going to work, but the intent is would have a way in the UI to determine if you're using SPV for Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash. Like, it's not going to be some hidden secret thing.
Yeah, so I certainly hope that's the case. I want to see that in the UI because I prefer SPV, but regardless, people who do want to remain on SPV will be able to do so. So that's the bottom line.
I have one other observation. Moonshot, you asked if the coin needs to be trusted. The API infrastructure that we're setting up is really only to be treated as a read-only ledger, if you will. Your local node will still be responsible for generating and managing your local keys, and you don't have to be concerned about your keys necessarily being stored on a remote device. Okay, your keys are still yours, and your wallet is effectively still secured or as secure as the device that your node is running on.
Well, it's trusted in the sense that the server could tell you received the payment when you actually didn't.
That's true, and to that end, we want to make the server that you're talking to configurable as well, even outside of the ones that OB1 is operating.
Yeah, those are all good points. Yeah, it's not custodial, to be clear, so these are held locally. But there is definitely a new element of trust that's being introduced by choosing this architecture. Moonshot follows up asking if performance is an obstacle to SPV. Do we consider running them for all coins and then limiting the wallets they can run simultaneously? And as Chris Trouton responds, having SPV for all coins isn't an option. That's correct. Right now, only Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash SPV wallets exist for OpenBazaar, and that wouldn't change. So being able to limit it to one wallet isn't going to be significant improvement enough to change the dynamic, basically. And a lot of this is also, some of this at least, is geared toward allowing OpenBazaar Go to run on mobile, which definitely SPV wallet there is just not viable. Chris Troutner asked a question earlier in the thread, asking if there's blowback from Shapeshift's announcement about accounts will impact the ability to pay using Shapeshift and OB. So, as I understand it right now, Shapeshift is no longer working in OpenBazaar anyway. We wanted it to be able to work to pay for transactions, and that wasn't working previously, but you could at least fund your wallet via Shapeshift. And I believe now that that's not working either because they've changed what they support. So I think it means Shapeshift for OpenBazaar is just no longer viable at all. Anyone else can come in and tell me if I'm wrong on that. More broadly, I don't know about I don't know what you mean by blowback. I know certainly the announcement was not well received by the crypto community. That's my perception. And I think OpenBazaar has an opportunity that a lot of people who previously used Shapeshift and cared about privacy can use OpenBazaar to more privately swap coins, that sort of thing. So I think it could be an opportunity. That's my personal take on it. If anyone else has thoughts on the Shapeshift stuff, feel free to jump in.
Yeah, it's worth mentioning that if anyone is really upset about Shapeshift not working inside of OpenBazaar, that doesn't preclude you from using Shapeshift and pointing it at your OpenBazaar wallet. That choice is still yours.
Yeah, and I just want to clarify that we do still have Shapeshift integration in the wallet to allow you to easily receive funds using Shapeshift, but it's not currently working, and we're not certain why. That's something I'm looking into. So we don't know if we accidentally changed something that broke it, or they changed something on their end, which is my suspicion.
Josh, does that use the Shifty button? Is that what it uses?
Yeah, it uses the API for that too.
Yeah, they just don't offer it anymore. Shapeshift.
Oh, did they discontinue it?
Yeah, it just doesn't exist.
Okay.
They dropped support of that at the same time when they announced this account stuff.
Well, in that case, we'll probably just remove it.
Yeah, I think that's what has to happen probably. Okay, well, I note that there are some new people in the user list. So if anyone wants to list themselves or something that they're working on in the chat, please feel free to do so. Of course, no obligation. Otherwise, I don't have any other announcements or things. Art asks if there's any news on Monero integration. And as far as I know, there's no specific attempts being made to integrate Monero. Based on this new API architecture that we're using for the wallets, you would need to have an insight. The standard way that people will be using it is they'll be contacting insight servers for using their coin or an SPV wallet. And as I understand it right now, Monero does not have an SPV wallet, nor are there any insight servers that support Monero.
It doesn't need to be an insight server. You just have to build something that satisfies the wallet interface. And that could be anything. I mean, Monero does have some kind of remote operation mode where you can connect to like a remote node or something like that. So that could possibly work. I mean, you could even build out like a Monero full node implementation if you wanted to, as long as it satisfies the interface.
Yeah, okay, that's all good to know. So I think the answer, though, is still, as far as I know, no one's working toward Monero integration. Sounds like it's possible, and it would be awesome if someone from the Monero community, contacted us to have us fully explain what is needed, and then they can go off and build it. but as of right now, OB1 is not putting resources into. All right, well, that's all the questions or comments that I see in the chat, other than Art asking if you want to use OB for services, is there a tutorial? I do not believe that there is a tutorial specifically for services. However, there are tutorials that are for both buyer and seller, explaining how to use the application. So depending on if you're just looking for an overall tutorial, sort of overview of how to use the system, those exist. If you want something specific to services, those do not exist. And honestly, the majority of listings on the network are physical listings, and a lot of the recent activity seems to be both physical listings and now these crypto listings. Services have not gotten a huge amount of focus from either the development team or the community based on what I can see by looking at it. So if someone were to take a hard look at using OpenBazaar for services and they find things that are lacking, we would love to hear feedback on what would be useful to you. Either jump into our Slack, or perhaps even better, open up an issue on GitHub saying, services to be viable for me on OpenBazaar, here's the things I need. That would be helpful to us. So yeah, please look for those tutorials. Yeah, they can be found on the blog. There's some that are kind of recent. And if you have trouble finding them, if you're not already in our Slack group, please join our Slack group and ping us, and we will make sure to send you the link. All right, well, thank you all for taking the time to join us. The next meeting is in 1 month. As always, please continue this conversation in our Slack group. If you have any questions or feedback, we'd love to hear it. Everyone have a great day.